Hey everyone, welcome back to Off House Brewing. Today I'm brewing an Irish Red, which really doesn't matter for the sake of the video, quite frankly. I'm going to go through the way that I look at water chemistry. I mean, between podcasts that I've seen and a bunch of other posts that I've seen on Facebook and the like, it seems to be something that I don't know if people necessarily struggle with, if they're maybe a little intimidated by it. But I'm going to show you that it's not that hard. And once again, I got a buddy over here, and my dog is losing his mind. So that's what you hear in the background. But it's pretty easy to do. I'll leave links for where I got my water report for the spreadsheet that I use, which is Brew and Water, which is a pretty common one. I'll also do it with Beersmith, because I know it's in a pretty common brewing software that a lot of people use. And I've looked at them side by side, and they're close enough for the sake of argument, or at least for trying to dial in water. It's really not difficult to do, and I believe, and I'm not sure if it's a kind of a placebo thing, but I believe that it has made an impact on my beer in doing it. So I'll show you a few other things that I do, and I hope that it's pretty helpful. I don't know if I'm going to do a tasting video with this because, like I said, the beer doesn't necessarily matter. But I'll just at least show you a few things that you can do on the front end to change your water chemistry. So stick around. Hopefully by the next time we should have some screenshots from my laptop, and you'll see the way that I do it. So stay tuned.
This is the Brew and Water spreadsheet. I'll put a link below on where to get it. The one thing that is important to know is that before you start, you need to get a water report, whether that water report comes from your local water utility or you send it out. I got mine from a place called Ward Labs, fairly well known. The one good thing about Ward Labs versus your municipal water report is that it is specifically tailored towards brewing. These salts up here are going to be the main ones that you're going to be looking at, and I've already pre-entered everything in here. As you can see by some of these outside the bicarbonate number, they're all pretty small. So here's where you want to start. This first tab, water report input. I know that the water pH is about 8. Everything that's in blue are the things that you will enter. All the rest of the cells I haven't touched. And that's pretty much all that's on here. One thing to note are these two guys right here that show that you need to multiply by your lab reports if they're reported like this. I personally had to with Ward Labs, as I recall. Sparge acidification, I do use lactic acid, 88%. Like I said before, 8 is my starting water pH. That's all I've had entered into here. On my grain bill, so I entered the name, and here's the recipe for the Irish Red that I'm going to brew. These here you'll see that have a nice little drop down. You just enter in the weight and enter in what the color is. Now, if you're like me and sometimes in the mash when you're using dark grains, you leave those out and you only add them in towards the end, say with like a big massive stout. You can choose here to remove the roast malts from your main mash. The biggest difference that it has is on your pH, as you can see right there, your room temperature pH, which will change. The dark grains do have a buffering capacity. So you can choose to put that in there, yes or no. There's also a suggested mash pH range right here. I do somewhat follow this. I think it's a decent thing to kind of go by. So when I'm looking at my water adjustment for this, I changed this to amber balanced. There are brown, black, I think there's yellow that's in here too. I pretty much only use these. I just think it's a good way to go. That's from everything that I have really read that's a suggested. Now it does have the ability to look at it from various cities, but you don't know that is what the actual water profile is in the beer. That's just what the water profile is in the city. More than likely, every municipality or every commercial brewer is changing their water for their specific beer style. Follow that. When I change this, it shows right here, these are the targets that I'm trying to shoot for calcium, magnesium, sodium sulfate, chloride, bicarbonate. I change these two right here. Now these are the main two that I use, are gypsum and calcium chloride. I'll also use salt. It says canning salt, but it's just sodium chloride, it's just regular salt. Those are the two primary salts that I use. I don't use Epsom salt. I don't use magnesium chloride. Every now and then I might need to use baking soda, but I think that's pretty rare when I do. So as you can see here, this is like 0.35. This is pretty much dialed in because I already have saved this. But if I change this to say 0.1, and this is a manual entry, you'll see these numbers fluctuate. If I undo that, that's where I'm really trying to hit. The main two things that I try to hit are really these two right here, sulfate and chloride. The magnesium and the sodium, by changing these two right here, don't really fluctuate all that much. I have had to on occasion change those. Calcium, the biggest thing that you want to do is stay above 50 to 60 ppm. If it's a little bit over, I haven't noticed a big difference if it does go over. The calcium does go up because the two things that I fluctuate the most right here both have calcium in them. Now, it's good to note too, before you start changing these things, that you enter in the mash volume and the sparge volume. So this is the amount of water that you're going to be put in the mash or the sparge, as well as the total batch volume right here. That will change all the math on here. Now that I have all of the salts determined, I want to change this mash pH. I was shooting for about 5.4. As I mentioned before, I use lactic, and I enter in right here. All I do is just fluctuate this up and down. The higher that it goes, the more that this will drop, because it's naturally acidic, and that's how pH works. I see here after I'm all done that in my mash, as the kind of is this column right here, I add 1.45 grams of gypsum. I add 1.08 grams of calcium chloride and 1.58 mils of lactic acid. In the sparge, 1.9, gypsum 1.4, calcium chloride 3.6 of lactic acid. These are the things that I modify on the Brew and Water template. It is pretty easy. After you do it a few times, it does have this kind of nice little cute calculation, or nice little cutesy thing at the end if you want to print that out. Really all I do is I take these values and I plug them into Beersmith. Into Beersmith. It is also possible to do this in Beersmith, as I have everything, all the ingredients in here. I go to my water. I have already added my local water report in right here. These are going to be the same values as it was in Brew and Water. Now I have added these in here because I took everything from Brew and Water and I put them into Beersmith. You don't have to do it that way. You can instead match a target profile. You choose one, and as you'll see, there's the same color oriented ones that I was talking about before. I have noticed between Beersmith and Brew and Water that there is some slight variance, although it is rather small. So as I mentioned before, here's my amber balanced. I could put this in and hit OK, and it shows here my targets. Now the one thing that it does, which is why I don't use this, or I don't particularly care for it a whole lot, is it will automatically say here are the best thing to put for all of the available salts. As I mentioned, I don't use all of the available salts. Now, why you can only exclude chalk and you can't exclude anything else, I don't know. But if you did, and you clicked OK, you would show all of these populating in for what you have put in there. That would be your choice to do it. I believe it transfers over, and it does. Here are the Epsom salt and lactic acid, and puts all that stuff in there. They are pretty close. Personally, I've had better success, particularly when it comes to the acid adjustments, in using Bruin water, which is why I use Bruin water as opposed to Beersmith. It is a personal preference. I know that it is a little bit different, as I mentioned, but that's okay. And I'll say it again, the one thing that's very important is that you put in your water report. If you don't put that in there, all of these calculations that this does for you is not going to matter. It's really going to be irrelevant, and it's really going to throw off your brewing. That's just super critical. So I'll mention that again, and from here I'll get to the actual, adding of salts. I don't think I missed any of these steps. There are little things that are in here. If there is something you have a question, just let me know.
All right, so I could do it one-handed. Now I'm just gonna add my gypsum. I have 1.45 grams. So we're gonna measure this in. We're a little bit over 1.55, but I'm really not that concerned about that. Carrot. And calcium chloride is 1.08. I know that is approximately a quarter teaspoon. We'll be a little more careful this time. Okay. And we're gonna call that pretty good. This I'm just gonna put right in my mash water. Perfect. Right as I fill it. And then I'm gonna do the same thing when I do my sparge water. Said I'll have the recipe in the notes, so you'll be able to know how much of that I put in there. But keep in mind, and I'll probably say this a few times, that this is specific to my water report and the targets that I'm going for. Well, I had an issue with one of the videos. As you could see, it said something like about using one hand versus two hands, because I didn't show the acid addition where I simply put the amount of acid for the mash in the mash tun before I put my strike water in. After I'm done with the initial sparge and I add in more sparge water, that's when I put in the second acid addition. So forgive me, the video was corrupt for some reason, but I think the biggest thing is to show that it is pretty easy to do. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to help. I'll put the links for Bruin water for Ward Labs. I'll put that down in the description below. If you like this, please feel free to share this, subscribe, and I will see you next time.